Hey, it's Straw Hat Sam here. I've got some tips and tricks to get your SteadXP unit working as best as possible for your drone FPV footage. I'm gonna get right to the point with the good stuff here. First tip, with wide-angle lenses, when doing the lens calibration procedure, it's actually best to use it's actually best to use a Hi, it's Straw Hat Sam here with some tips and tricks to get your SteadXP unit working properly with your drone FPV footage. I'm going to start off with the good stuff here. First is lens calibration. That can be quite difficult. A trick I learned for this, especially with wide-angle lenses where it's hard to get the whole checkerboard pattern in the screen and not have it super distorted, is to set the f-stop or the aperture as tight as possible so there's the longest field of view where everything is in focus. Now the problem with that is you're in a dark room and you've got no light other than your computer screen. So to compensate, what you can do is put your camera on a tripod, set it up to the correct angle, and then set your shutter speed as slow as possible. That's realistic. Now that's why the tripod is absolutely critical, because if you budge it at all, any kind of blurriness or out of focusness will absolutely ruin the checkerboard pattern, amalgamation, calibration thingy. So use a tripod, a higher focal length, or like f22, whatever, and then slow down your shutter as much as possible to let in the most amount of light. And that way everything will be in focus and everything will be bright and clear, and the checkerboard pattern will be clear so that the camera can be calibrated properly with your wide-angle lens. So if you've looked at the lens calibrations that are already a part of the SteadXP software, the ones that I did myself were actually for the Blackmagic Pocket 4K, the Samyang 12mm, and the Laowa 7.5 ultra wide. That was me. All right, next tip is when you're doing your synchronization jerks, you know, in the tutorials they say like really fast like that, even faster than that. For slower shutter speeds, like 180-degree shutter, I found it's actually better to do it a little bit slower, like that. And then the calibration or the syncing process works out better in the software. So that's a trick. If you're using 180-degree shutter, just slow down your jerks a bit. Next is you want to use ProRes on your camera. I know B-RAW is awesome, and it's great if you can get away with using Adobe Warp Stabilizer. I think it's awesome. It's the 12-bit color schema, science, whatever. It looks beautiful. The problem is that SteadXP doesn't natively accept B-RAW. So what you want to do is record in ProRes so you can natively import it into SteadXP, and then when you get your clips and cut it out, you can export as ProRes again, put it into your final timeline, and then export it as an MP4 or H.264 or whatever. That way you're only exporting the clip twice. I found that when doing it 3 times, the color data really got degraded and everything kind of just looked blotchy. But with ProRes, at least with the 10-bit, it looks much better than having to use MP4 and then exporting it 3 times. Fourth trick, this one is really crucial. You want to have as little vibration as possible between your lens and your camera. You can either do this by putting a piece of electrical tape around the base of the mount, or like what I have here, I'm using the battery strap to secure the camera, so that's kind of a 2-in-1 deal. It also bends the lens in such a way that it's got no play at all. In any kind of play at all, it will create this artificial jello effect in SteadXP. I can show a clip of that here. And so this isn't real jello. This is something where the SteadXP can't resolve the image because there is no gyro data for the movement of the lens because it's independent of the camera. In the software world of SteadXP, use no more than 10. No more than 10 is necessary in order to get smooth footage if you're any kind of good pilot. Now, with 10, there's a big jump between 9.9 and 10. And I usually use a crop factor of like 80 to 85 when I'm using a stability factor of 10. But I usually like to keep between 9 and 9.9. And the reason for that is because I use 180-degree shutter, so I'm using traditional film cinema settings in order to get the proper motion blur so it looks good, but you have to use less stabilization in SteadXP in order to not have any kind of weird artifacts. Here's another tip: use some kind of vibration isolation. I've used a ton. I'm not going to recommend anything specific for you because every rig is different. This is running 9-inch props, so what works for me may not work for the Shendrone stick. So I encourage you to just experiment and try it out. There's TPU, there's alpha gel, there's just silicone, there's yoga block foam, balance pad foam, there's yoga mat foam, there's acoustic foam, there's all sorts of things, even like cut up pieces of dishwasher tube into rings, wire rope stabilizers. Here's a big one: be careful with any kind of stabilization system that has a lot of play with the camera. If it's a loose fit, there is a risk that, especially with a bigger drone like this, the natural frequency at which the drone oscillates is the same at which the camera moves independently of the drone frame. And if that happens, you'll get a flyaway, and that's how I broke my first Pocket 4K. And the last thing isn't really so much related to SteadXP, but it's you have to take up an audio channel with SteadXP to feed audio into the camera in order to get it to sync properly. So for the leftover audio that I use for scratch audio or just getting the sound of the drone, I change my gains only to like 5 to 8%. If I do any more with that, especially with these powerful motors, the wind and the motor noise or the propeller noise just blows out the mic and you can ruin your mic. So bring those audio gains way down for that free channel you're using for your drone audio. Okay, we're ready to go for our SteadXP journey. Unplug the cable between each use of the SteadXP unit. So I'm going to plug that cable in now. Make sure it's securely fastened and aligned correctly with the camera. And then you can begin recording once you confirmed that the audio channels are showing the SteadXP sync stuff. And then now it's all good. I'm recording. Align it with the horizon and give 3 or 4 slow shakes. Not too jerky like that. Just kind of like meh. Alright, and then you can power up the drone. And then hit the stop record button and you're good to go. After it's done recording, just unplug it from the SteadXP unit again. So if you're watching this video and trying to decide whether you should purchase SteadXP and have it shipped from France and get the GoPro Hero 3 batteries and all that, if you're an FPV pilot and you're pretty experienced, I say go ahead, go do it, because it's the best thing out there, honestly. Even with all its quirks and its flaws, it's nothing compares to it as far as the versatility and its ability to overcome all the kind of movements that a drone can do, especially when moving closely to objects without freaking out like Adobe Warp Stabilizer. So I'm going to list some pros and cons, and hopefully this will help you decide. There's lots of cons, but there are things that you can manage if you plan ahead and yeah. Okay, pros. There's no warpage at all, like Warp Stabilizer. If you get close to objects, it's not going to freak out because it's just using gyro data from the hardware here. And then you can use it with a Mac or a PC, and you can use it with a whole variety of cameras. So it's something, once you buy it, you can keep it around for a long time. It's not going to really go obsolete on you. And then lastly, this is just the best stabilization software for DSLR or cinema cameras for FPV drone footage out there. There really isn't anything better, so you're kind of forced to get something like this to get the top-notch quality. Okay, so some cons are there's no B-RAW support. It would be so awesome if you could shoot in B-RAW and then import it straight into SteadXP and then export as B-RAW and then use it in your timeline and then do your color grading there. That would be amazing. but you can't. You got to use ProRes. Okay, and then you'll have to worry about these extra peripherals like this audio cable. You have to remember this to put this in your bag, especially if you're coming to a place way out here. You have to remember extra SD cards for your SteadXP unit. You need to remember GoPro Hero 3 batteries. You need to charge them. You can get them on eBay. They're still around. They're easy to find. And then the lens calibration, it's a big project. Like, I would devote half a day to it, just to sit down, calm down, be chill, sort it out. It's not going to be easy. Just keep that in mind. We all have had, troublesome experiences with building drones, and it's a learning curve. So just take your time with it and use a tripod. Set your focal distance to like f/22, and then slow down your shutter speed in order to get everything in focus and everything as bright as possible. Okay, and then another thing is you need to do the whole camera jerky when you sync it up. That's another step that you have to remember to do. I kind of like it though, because it actually helps me remember to unplug and plug in the drone safely, and also it helps me remember to record every single time. Another con, it's sensitive to vibrations, so you need some kind of vibration isolation for sure. Both in between the lens and the camera, you need to make that as rigid as possible, and you need to isolate the vibrations from the motors. Okay, lastly, when you're all good and you have your stabilization cut out, the post-processing takes more time, because 8 or 10 minutes of footage, that can take up to 3 or 4 hours to process, especially if you're using a high quality codec like ProRes. So that's just going to take more time, even with a powerful computer. Like mine is a Ryzen 3900X, but it's very CPU heavy, so it's just going to crunch away. Very similar to how Adobe Premiere's warp stabilizer is very CPU heavy. So that's going to take more time, and you have to take that into account. So in summary, I would highly recommend SteadXP. It can be a real pain in the butt. It's a steep learning curve. You have to have a lot of patience, but I hope this video helps in order to get you on the right track, because once you get it all working and you get used to the workflow, it really sets your game to the next level. All right, thanks for watching.